Hello, I'm Dr. Jane McCartney. I'm a consultant chartered psychologist in the UK, fascinated by human behaviour, but particularly criminal human behaviour. What makes a person do what they do? What makes a person murder, kill, commit a crime? If I could ask you to please like, subscribe, share, all the usual things, and please feel free to put some comments in the section below. That'd be really interesting to see what you have to say. In today's episode, which is a podcast episode, it's the case of the murder of Molly McLaren, who was killed in just the most brutal and awful way by her stalker ex, Joshua Stimpson. It's really interesting because it's almost, if there could be a classical case of a stalker that turns into a murderer, this would be it.
Molly McLaren was a 23-year-old student at Kent University in the UK. She was from a stable background, and although had one or two issues with anxiety and eating disorders in her youth, she was happy and she was getting on with her life. She hadn't had many long-term boyfriends, just a few fleeting, just the usual teenage relationships. And when she thought that she was ready for a long-term relationship, she looked, like a lot of people her age, to Tinder. And it wasn't long before the algorithm matched her with Joshua Stimpson. Stimson was 3 years older than Molly, but seemed to have everything that she wanted. He was tall, he was dark, he had a job, he had prospects, he was interesting. And to begin with, even though they lived quite close to each other, their relationship was conducted purely online. When they did eventually meet in November 2016, they had started online chats a few months before in the July of 16, but when they eventually met in November 16, the relationship was quite intense to begin with. Molly found the attention from Stimson, although overwhelming, as she wasn't that experienced in what it was to have a proper boyfriend. She didn't actually have a yardstick to measure what was a proper relationship, but there was obviously something telling her that this wasn't quite right. Stimson, quite early on in the relationship, would tell her that he was bipolar, and that was the excuse for his erraticness. When they'd met, he was working as a local warehouse man, but he would soon give up the job, and Molly would complain to her mother that it was very childish, and this was very typical of him. But he would say this was his bipolar. His erraticness, his up and down moods, his unpredictability was his bipolar, which he claimed he had been diagnosed with, not long after they'd met. And it was all becoming too much for Molly. She wanted to gain some distance from Stimson, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. Molly's mum would later say that he was immature, he was persistent, and he really would not take no for an answer, and he would badger Molly until she agreed with whatever it was that he wanted, which primarily was to be in a relationship with her. March, the following year, 2017, Molly would say to her mother, "I'm bored of him, I want to end the relationship." But he was due to run the London Marathon for a bipolar charity, and she felt that she couldn't let him down at such a crucial point in his training. Molly would eventually meet the rest of his family at the event. She hadn't met them previously, and although they came from the Midlands, it's not too many miles. If Stimson was serious in this relationship and he was mature in this relationship, he would have introduced Molly to his family long before the 6-month period that they actually finally met. When Molly met his family, they would say what a good influence Molly was having on him, how she was able to stabilise him. Perhaps they were hinting to her that if she wasn't in his life, then they didn't want him back in theirs. A little time later, Molly, Stimson, and her family were staying in a hotel. Molly's mother recalled an incident where Molly had called her in a state of agitation, distress, and anger. She went to her daughter's room. Molly said to her, "You won't believe what he's been doing. He's been videoing me. He's been filming me." And her mother noted later how Stimson would just lie on the bed. He wouldn't engage with the conversation. You're being accused of an illegal act, and it was as if they were talking about another person. The relationship carried on for a few more months. They would go on holiday together, they'd come back, but Molly knew deep down she didn't see any future with Stimson. He was too difficult, he was too possessive, he was too controlling, he was too erratic. He'd recently just been given a new job as a double glazing salesman, which apparently he flew through the interview process. Molly was hoping this might bring some well-needed stability into his life, but that wasn't to be. Soon after he started missing days at work. He would break down and cry, and again he would tell them that his erraticness and his unreliability was down to his bipolar, and his new work seemingly bent over backwards to accommodate him. They suggested that he went part-time, which he agreed to. In June of 2017, Molly again told her mum that she was going to end the relationship with Stimson. She felt she was too young, and he was just too much hard work. She decided that the best place to tell him would be at a crowded event. She obviously had concerns about his reaction to her telling this, and with the safety of the crowd in mind, she duly did, and he announced at the top of his voice to the crowd at this social event, "She's finished with me," pointing at Molly. This was on the 17th of June. For the next few days, he would launch an unremitting social media campaign against Molly. He would be abusive, and he would accuse her of taking cocaine. And on the 20th of June, just 3 days after they broke up, Stimson would be seen buying what turned out to be lethal weapons. So concerned was Molly about Stimpson's behaviour, especially the online abuse, she would screenshot and print out the abuse from Stimson on her Facebook page and take it to the local police. A PC Philpott called Stimson on loudspeaker in Molly's presence. He would say to Stimson, "We don't want Molly to have to come back to the police station with more accusations, would we?" Stimson would answer, "Wouldn't we?" And yet more abuse would follow, including him writing on her posts, "There's more to come." A week after visiting the local police station, PC Philpott would call Molly. This is the 27th of June. He would say that Stimson had agreed to take down the posts. He said he was doing it for his work. He didn't want his new customers to see what he may have written or what his associations were. At no point did anybody think to question why on earth would any of his potential customers be looking at a random Facebook page. They wouldn't know Molly. They would have no interest in her. But this seemed to satisfy the police. On the 28th of June, Molly, as was her custom, because she was also taking qualifications to be a personal trainer, she would visit her local gym so she could film herself, which was part of her course. And as she didn't want to take part in any of the classes, she would just film herself using the gym equipment, as was a requirement of the course. That evening she would also go out with some friends. She was in a local pub and Stimson appeared. He had a new woman with him that nobody recognised, and this new woman appeared a little confused as to why she was there. Stimson would repeatedly walk past the table where Molly and her friends were sitting. He would be walking out to the smoking area. It was said later he never smoked, and Molly would say to her mother that he just turned round from the smoking area and just stared at her. Molly, with her friends looking out for her, would go home safely that evening. The following day, again, she would go to her local gym so she could film herself for her personal training course. Stimson appeared next to her. She sent a text to her mother saying, "He's here, he's following me." Her mother would say, "Come home straight away and drive safely." That was the last time that Molly's mum would hear from her. She would be able to send one more message on a group WhatsApp to her friends who she'd been out with the previous night. They said to get home, he's a creep, and try not to worry about him. That would be the last time that Molly had any communication with anybody else. Molly left the gym, and Stimson would follow her. The gym was situated near a busy shopping area. He would prowl around the full car park looking for Molly. He saw her little black car. He pulled open the door, and he launched his deadly attack on Molly. I'm not going to go into the details of what he did, but it was horrendous. And a passing motorist saw what was going on and vainly attempted to help Molly. He would run up to the car. He could see the frenzied attack that was going on. He tried to slam Stimpson's leg in the door. His leg was on the outside, still resting on the ground. And he said all he didn't stop attacking Molly. He just moved his foot inside, and he tried to grab hold of his leg to pull him away. He was screaming and shouting at him, but unfortunately he couldn't get a grip for obvious reasons. Stimson would get out of the car, stand by the car, and when the police arrived just a few minutes later, would say, "It's me you're looking for." Molly was pronounced dead when the doctors and ambulance crew arrived. She had been stabbed over 75 times. Although Stimson immediately pleaded guilty to the attack on Molly, he really couldn't not. His trial was set for January 2018, the following year, and the trial was principally to decide whether or not he was in control of his faculties when he attacked Molly. He was pleading guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Although this as a defence in the UK has been around for decades, it was most famously used by Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. And if you can prove that you were not in control of your thoughts and your behaviours due to a mental impairment, then under UK law you can be found guilty of manslaughter and not murder. And this would be the difference when capital punishment was still available as a sentence up until the early 60s in the UK. This would be the difference between life and death. It was only murderers that would be hung, not people that were mad, because the madness was purported to mitigate the murder. And this developed into diminished responsibilities, that you don't know what you're doing because you are not in control of yourself. And this is what Stimson was trying to plead. He didn't stab Molly over 75 times. It was his mental state that would do so. And remember, Stimson had told people for as long as he possibly could that he was bipolar. Ultimately, it would come down to the opinion of two psychiatrists. One psychiatrist being at the Mental Health Secure Unit where Stimson had been sent upon his arrest, who was called by the defence, and the other psychiatrist who was called by the prosecution, who disagreed with that, who said Stimson knew exactly what he was doing at all times. He did not have a mental disorder that impeded his thoughts and behaviour enough for him not to be responsible for them. During the trial, there seemed to be a lot of toing and froing between the prosecution and the defence, and who and which psychiatrist would say what. They were trying to establish that Stimson had a personality disorder. And what I find particularly interesting is, out of all the personality disorders to suggest that he may have had, they didn't say a narcissistic personality disorder. And there's a reason for that, which I'll come on to in a couple of minutes. They wanted to say that he had borderline personality disorder, or as it's often called now, emotionally unstable personality disorder. And if you can establish a personality disorder in the UK, that will often mitigate your actions. And recently, famously, on the appeal of quite a well-known case, Sally Challen, who had killed her husband and was originally jailed for murder, on appeal, it was concluded that she had an undiagnosed borderline personality disorder, therefore wasn't entirely responsible for her actions when she killed her husband. And her appeal was going through on the strength of her undiagnosis, not the fact that she killed him and then she was subsequently released. And that's what, in Stimpson's case, they were trying to prove. They were trying to prove that he had a personality disorder that then rendered him not 100% responsible for his actions towards Molly. And the prosecution was denying this, saying that he did not have a personality disorder. He was childish, he was vain, he was narcissistic, but he didn't have a personality disorder that basically let him off the hook. And Stimson, if you remember, had spent a lot of his time and his background trying to excuse his characteristics, his behaviours, his suddenly leaving jobs, his being childish, his being possessive, his being controlling. He would put this down to his bipolar, and he even ran and raised money for a bipolar charity to make sure that people's thinking were aligned to the fact that he had bipolar. Bipolar, again, is a mercifully rare condition, but he wasn't displaying the usual traits of bipolar. If we think about bipolar in its previous incarnation, what it used to be called, which was manic depression, which is a little bit more explanatory. You would have huge highs. I've treated plenty of people with bipolar. They have huge highs, they don't sleep. Their behaviour, again, can be really erratic because they are pumped. They have got so much neuroadrenaline and other brain, neurochemicals running around their head because the taps that turn on the neuroadrenaline, the serotonin, the dopamine, all the things that we normally are able to regulate ourselves, the taps in somebody that's generally bipolar just will suddenly turn on, and then they'll have huge amounts of energy, a lack of requirement for sleep, they don't make very good decisions. And this can't last, of course, and that's where you get the massive drop. That's what we call the depression. So when we talk about the mania, and then you talk about the depression, and history of art, if you like, is peppered with people with genuine bipolar. Turner, Van Gogh, to name just a couple, Virginia Woolf being another. And they would work furiously in their manic state because they had so much energy and ability to be able to perform and create. But then that can't last. It can't physically last. And then you drop and have a massive, massive drop. It is like, people with bipolar will talk about it as falling off a cliff edge or they just drop completely and their energy is depleted. They have to go to bed for weeks sometimes, and get a proper diagnosis of bipolar is a crucial thing. But back to Stimson, he wasn't seemingly showing any genuine bipolar characteristics. There was erraticness, but he was using that, and he was making sure that the average person who doesn't perhaps know as much about bipolar was going to think about him as having this condition and making allowances for him. Even though both psychiatrists at his trial would disagree on him having a personality disorder, the one thing that they both agreed on was that he didn't have bipolar. While Stimson was on remand in the Mental Health Secure Unit, he would attempt, and I use that term in inverted commas because they rarely actually attempt as if they're going to do it. It's all for show. He would attempt to take his own life. He would barricade himself in the room. He would generally misbehave and try and come over and convince the staff, so they would make reports, obviously, about his mental vulnerability, trying to suggest that all the time that he wasn't in control of what he did, his behaviours, his actions towards Molly. The jury pronounced a unanimous verdict of murder. They didn't believe the defence of diminished responsibilities. He was sentenced to 26 years without parole, and the judge at his trial, Judge Adele Williams, would say that he didn't have personality issues, he had issues with women. At Stimpson's trial, 2 previous girlfriends, who he had had brief relationships with, would also give evidence to say about his controlling and his possessive nature. One of the girlfriends would say, on their very first date, he would tell her not to look at any men. He would also subsequently tell her what she could wear and couldn't wear. Another previous girlfriend would say after she'd broken up with him, he would hang around and wait outside her flat, and at one point he managed to talk his way into her flat, saying that his mobile had run out of charge. She let him in, she let him charge the phone. She was genuinely scared and for some reason let him in, going along with what he wanted. And when he had charged the phone and he was leaving, she then shouted at him that if he ever returned, she would call the police. So the jury would find him guilty of murder, and because the prosecution were able, under no shadow of doubt, to claim that he premeditated the murder, he was sentenced to one of the highest tariffs that they could possibly give him, which was 26 years without parole. So who was Joshua Stimpson, and why, on the 29th of June 2017, did he launch such a frenzied and unabated attack on Molly McLaren, 23-year-old personal fitness trainer, who had broken up with him 12 days before? So Stimson was brought up in Stoke-on-Trent, which is a Midlands town in the UK. And after he had finished his formal education, he'd moved to the Medway area, which is the top bit of Kent if you look on a map. He didn't move with his family, and I'm not sure the reason that he moved, but I can imagine the Stimpsons of this world like to reinvent themselves. when you look at his background, you're not hearing huge amounts about friends or social contacts. And often people like Stimson will want to reinvent themselves. They didn't get on very well at school, so let's move to a completely different part of the country and reinvent myself. But the problems that you have and have had will just follow you. You might be able to reinvent yourself. You might even be able to change your name, change a lot of physical characteristics about yourself, but your mental and your emotional characteristics will eventually come out. And this is what happened with Stimson. So he tries dating. Tinder is seemingly the place that a lot of people will go, and it can be very successful. I know from friends and family of my own that they've had very successful dates. Some of them have turned into very long-term relationships. But I also know it can be the biggest nightmare, and this is online dating in general, not just Tinder, but it can attract people that are looking for a certain type of character. You know, it might be that they just want somebody to get together with briefly, or you could be looking, as was Stimpson's case, for the vulnerable. And Stimson, I'm going to tell you exactly what he is right from the beginning. He is a narcissist. He is a classic, absolute narcissist. And that's why at his trial, they didn't talk as a defence about having a narcissistic personality disorder. There's various personality disorders, and they tried to stick borderline and emotionally unstable on him because they didn't even want to suggest in the jury's mind the term of narcissism, because he fits every single possible characteristic of a 100% narcissist that you could possibly think of, and they didn't want to suggest that to the jury, because then that way he was found guilty anyway, but it was almost as if that would be no point in having the defence then. He also, at his trial, didn't take the stand, and again they would say, his defence would say, because he can't add anything to what happened, he would claim that he would have memory lapses. He didn't remember the few days before the attack on Molly. But it was too dangerous from a defence point of view for him to take the stand, because narcissists are quick-tempered, and it wouldn't take much of a prosecution barrister to quickly get under his skin and to show the jury exactly what this chap was about. And so it's too risky. So he didn't take the stand in his own defence. This is often a tactic that is used. If you remember the Why Killers Kill I did a few episodes ago about Katrina Walsh and Sarah Williams, who killed Sadie Hartley. Williams, because she thought she was cleverer than everybody else, took the stand, and they decided that Walsh shouldn't. And it wasn't through a narcissism that she didn't take the stand. It was because she would just implicate herself even more, so she couldn't be trusted to take the stand, whereas Stimson didn't take the stand because he would implicate himself. It wouldn't take much to push him to implicate himself. So let's just have a think about classic traits of narcissism. And believe me, in my practice, I know I say this about a lot of things, but I come across narcissists, or more to the point, the partners, the wives, the family, the children of narcissists so many times. And I know I talk about psychopaths as well, and traits of psychopaths and sociopaths, but the rule is the rule being that every single psychopath is a narcissist, but not every single narcissist is a psychopath. There is a slight delineation between the two. But anyway, let's just think about narcissists, because Stimson ticked every single box. So they have a high need for control. They have to control everything. And their belief is that if they are not in control, then they are the victim. They will happily be the victim if it suits them. Remember, Stimson wanted to be the victim of his bipolar. That time that he shouted out in front of a crowd of people he didn't know about Molly finishing with him. Again, he wanted to be the victim. He wanted to be the victim of her. And if you remember back when they were staying in the hotel and Molly discovered him videoing and filming her, that would have been him trying to find out things that Molly may have been saying about him or writing about him on social media to justify his then subsequent actions about her, his controlling nature, his possessiveness. Narcissists are looking to be the victim at all times and then finding out the evidence to justify their behaviour. And that's what he was doing then. He probably, that's one situation that we know about, but there would have been many others. So yeah, a high need for control, because if they're not in control to a narcissist, then they are the victim, and they will do everything not to be the victim. And this is in all forms of their life. It's not just in relationships, it's in family circles, it's in work, social circles, and often they don't have many social friends because normal people get fed up of the narcissists. They get fed up of the drama attached to them. They get fed up of the manipulation. So they find it exceptionally hard to maintain long-standing social relationships. They have exceptionally low empathy. Again, if we think about Stimson's trial, it's not about the murder of Molly. It's about him. It's about his mental state. And he probably would have been lapping it up because everybody's thinking about him. They're not thinking about Molly. She was indispensable. She abandoned him. She rejected him. They tried to say at the trial that this was an issue that he had with his mother leaving the family home at the age of 12. I'm not sure about the details of that. I can't seem to find anything about that. It's just that it was mentioned at the trial. And yet she was there when he was running the marathon. So I'm not sure, as I say, about the details of that. But it's an excuse. And again, it's a reason to be a victim. And I don't doubt that if they'd looked at his school reports from that time, how badly he did, how badly he socialised, it would have all been put down to that. His mother left, he has a fear of abandonment, and therefore he acts in this type of way towards women. And previous girlfriends attested to this. That is not so much about the fear of abandonment, it's about not wanting to be the victim of somebody else. If you're not in control, if you're not the perpetrator, then there's only two sides to that coin as far as a narcissist is concerned. Then you're the victim, and he didn't want to do that at all costs. Very exploitative and manipulative. They will rewrite history. That's a very common trait. They make up an alternative reality. When he was lying on the bed, remember at the hotel again, and Molly's quite naturally freaking out about finding out about him filming and videoing her, her mum would say how he was just lying there, just not bothered. And his alternative reality is, why the hell do you care? I'm doing what I want to do for me. I really don't understand why you care. Their inability to think or put themselves in anybody else's position, and that lack of empathy screamed out from Stimson right from the moment that I started reading about the case. Narcissists have to be in a superior position all the time, and they will strive and do anything to be in that superior position. Because again, it's the same coin, and if you're not superior, then you're inferior. It's a very black and white way of thinking. There's no grey in their lives. You're either up or you're down. There is nothing in between, and they will strive and do anything to be in the up position. They have limited, if any, emotional growth, no maturity, as proved when he was exceptionally childish, apparently, about when he stopped his warehouse job that he was doing when Molly met him. He would have come up with all sorts of reasons, but the primary reason that I absolutely guarantee, I didn't read this anywhere, but I can take a punt at the primary reason that he left the warehouse job was because he was the victim of somebody else. Somebody had done something, or somebody had said something, he wasn't treated properly. In his mind, he was the victim and therefore had to leave, and got very childish about it. I don't know what they meant when they talked about childish. Probably taking some revenge on somebody. One of the previous girlfriends, apparently he slashed their tyres. This was again up in the Midlands, so it was kind of nearer where his original family was from, and he slashed her tyres, and she called the police, and again the police were called, but the police were called in and gave him a caution. And this was the tragedy of this and many other cases that happened. There's no guarantee that if the Kent police were able to access the Staffordshire police's records about him, they would have taken his harassment and his stalking of Molly more seriously, but they didn't. And, this is the tragedy, and I'm afraid even in 2020, it's exactly the same. There's no joined up police operation. One force will have information about another force, and unless somebody specifically asks about that person and about their behaviours, it's not a national system as such. In all of our lives, it's full of complexities and nuance and difficulties. And part of growing and establishing ourselves as decent human beings is that we adapt to that. Sometimes things work for us, sometimes they don't. And sometimes we just have to suck it up and get on with it and learn from it. But a narcissist is unable to do that. They're toddlers in big bodies, if you like. And it's not uniquely a male trait, but it is astonishingly, it is more males that you can think of that are narcissistic than females. They can't receive any advice or input. It's either my way or no way, and if it's not right, then it's rarely my fault. It's other people's or other things' faults. It's never anything that I've ever done. They desperately construct an image and a characteristic of themselves, which this is where online dating is just such a minefield. It's a shark tank of narcissists, because they've constructed an image of themselves, and anything that potentially might damage that, like the truth about them, they will do everything possible not to have to endure. And they will twist things, they will manipulate situations, and you often get situations, and again, this is what I've worked with a lot, where you will have people that will just go, I will just do anything for a quiet life. I don't believe what Mr. A is saying to me, but I'll just do anything for a quiet life because it's just not worth the hassle to try and challenge him about it. And therefore, the Mr. A's of this world, I'm talking about my clients here, so I'm not going to name them, or the partners of my clients more accurately, they will say, I'll do anything for a quiet life, and therefore the Mr. A's of this world will just think, well, I'm right then, and my outbursts and my childishness was right. I've been proved right, and therefore I carry on. It's like an echo chamber. You build your own little echo chamber that I'm right, you don't disagree with me, therefore I'm right, and I will carry on being right. And if you disagree with me, then I'll shout and I'll make your life difficult, and then you'll agree with me and I was right all along and you were wrong. This is exactly the black and white world that a true narcissist will live in. So just having a little think about narcissists as we're talking about them, and they're going to come up again because a lot of killers are narcissists. Where do they come from? It's a combination of, it's always the usual thing, nature, nurture. And if you look at twin studies, which are invaluable studies to psychologists and psychiatrists, they reckon that it's between 40 and 60% of a nature, a genetic predisposition to be a narcissist. So if we kind of say 50%, but what brings it out, you could have somebody that is a narcissist by a genetic predisposition, but if they are brought up in such an environment where this isn't allowed to flourish, then it's tempered, it's reduced, and they can probably function in the world quite well. But often, because of the genetic predisposition, it is likely that the narcissist will be brought up by somebody in their close family who themselves has narcissistic traits. If we think about things like, they would have experienced from other people the black and white thinking, it's my way or no way. Often there's an overemphasis on the outside benefits of other people. So you would look at people and you say, look, they're successful, they've got money, they're good looking, they've got influence, they don't care about people. People that are being picked out to show how you should be are often people that can be ruthless and are known to be unkind to other people, but because they get their own way, they're considered to be acceptable. And this kind of thinking would be encouraged in the nurturing environment. It seems odd to call it nurturing because it's the last thing it is, but it's the behavioural environment, it's the demonstration environment, it's the environment that a child may grow up in and see what they believe to be is right. Another thing about narcissists, which again is very closely aligned with insecurity and poor attachment, is an inconsistent caregiver, the type of parent that might be there for you 1 minute and all over you and interested in you, and the next minute when you try and have the same conversation with them, couldn't give two figs about you. Why are you bothering me? Yeah, I was interested in your homework yesterday and I was all over you and it kind of suited me to be like that. But today you're asking me again, I'm just not interested. Or you've hurt yourself. As a toddler, this is really common. You've fallen over, you've hurt yourself. Oh, right, are there other people around? Do I need to show that I'm parent of the year by running over to you and attending to your scraped knee? And the next time you do it and you run to them for a bit of comfort, a bit of attention, and they push you away. Inconsistency in primary caregiver responsibilities and attitude is high on a lot of traits, a lot of emotional traits, but is certainly in there with narcissism. Narcissists are also often exposed to anger, inappropriate anger, not being able to work things out when it's needed. It's either, again, one or the other. It's the silent treatment or it's rage and shouting at you. So not knowing where you are, that kind of insecurity. And that insecurity, of course, then leads to the sense of being a victim. So we can see the circular nature of what goes on here. There are a few other things that I'm sure I'll talk about in later episodes, Why Killers Kill episodes. But narcissists, just to emphasise, have a genetic component and a predisposition, have it brought out by their nurturing environment or their lack of nurturing environment and their lack of boundaries, or they have it mitigated by a boundaried environment, family environment. Stimson would be a classical stalker as well, and there's different types of stalker, which I'll again talk about in another Why Killers Kill podcast, but suffice to say, there's 5 classifications of stalkers, but Stimson comes under the first and the most dangerous classification of the stalker, which is a revengeful stalker. If you don't love me, then you hate me, and if you hate me, then I have to get rid of you to make myself feel better about myself. That is as plain and as black and white as Stimpson's thinking would have got. I come up with all the excuses to treat you like I have done because it justifies my behaviour. And if I tell people that I've got a mental health illness and I'm not fully responsible for my actions, again, that just screams a level of premeditation and learning from his previous girlfriends that Stimson has applied to the tragic situation with Molly. That was the stalking and murder of Molly McLaren by Joshua Stimpson in June 2018. And as I like to do, just at the end of this, the last word and the last memory goes to Molly. She was 23 at the time of her death, so I'm imagining she was just 22 when she met Stimson, and seemingly a lovely girl, a little bit naive. She'd had a few issues with some anxiety and a few eating disorders when she was younger. And in fact, after her death, her family set up the Molly McLaren Foundation, which they raised some money towards helping individuals overcome anxiety and eating disorders in her memory. So she had her life to live. She was just finishing doing her personal training course, which was something she was obviously interested in, and she'd strived really hard to get over her issues, and she was succeeding. She was a student, she was becoming a personal trainer. She had her whole life in front of her, and she just had the misfortune to swipe the wrong way on Tinder, and Stimson came into her life. But we must remember Molly as a lovely, pretty, clever, bright girl who unfortunately met a revenge-taking narcissist.
Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I hope you found the case educational. I think when I cover these cases, which there are a lot, I deal with narcissists, not narcissists themselves. Sometimes they do come to see me, but generally it's the people that are on the other side, the victims of the narcissist, an awful lot. And if we can get the education out there and people are aware of what these people are like, it can only be for the better. So if I could ask you to please like, subscribe, share and comment below, that would be really great. And until next time, please keep safe and goodbye.